Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of ReelPR with me, Fiona Scott. I hope you're having a good day, a good week, a good month. Today, we've got an amazing guest, an amazing young man that I've met in real life and virtually many times. His name's Romesh, and he's an expert with numbers, money, and we all know in business that we need to be on top of these things. In my view, the two things are really, really important. One is marketing and PR, of course, and the other is money and numbers. But before we get into it, I'm going to let Romesh introduce himself. So here we go.
Thank you so much, Fee. Just want to say, it's been brilliant getting to know you through the networking group, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. So, everyone, I'm Ramesh. I'm the founder of the FD Consultant, which is a collective or group of part-time finance director consultants who help growing businesses. For my sins, I'm a qualified accountant. I qualified with one of the big firms in London many years ago. I spent several years at a FTSE 100 business where I rotated into various senior finance roles. But since 2008, I've either been a full-time chief financial officer or finance director of a couple of quite successful growing businesses. I'm really passionate about helping businesses grow with my skills and expertise, and hence I set up the FD Consultant in 2020. So we're 5 years old this year.
Oh, that's a story. That's a story.
I
I'm
knew you were
sorry,
going to
got to get
say
in there.
that.
It's a story. But I know that you offer a sort of a fractional service. Explain what that means, Ramesh.
It's just a posh or a kind of newfangled term fee for part-time, essentially, So the idea is that there are a lot of businesses out there, I believe, that don't need a full-time finance director, don't have the budget for a full-time finance director. So what we're offering is flexible support, depending on what each particular business needs.
I mean, I recognized really early on in my business, Ramesh, that I always thought I was good with money because I can manage a budget. And I grew up with my mum watching her put money aside every week from my dad's pay packet for the coal, the mortgage. And so I learned how to run a budget. And I assumed when I started in business that that was enough. And then I realized really, really quickly that it's not enough just to be able to run a budget. You need to understand money far more deeply, especially if you want to grow a business. Um, you might not know this about me, Ramesh. We might not have spoken about it, but so the first person that I outsourced anything to was an accountant because I think in business you need to have people around you who are smart around money if you're not smart around money yourself. Is that music to your ears?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I mean, I definitely support that concept because ultimately, when you are a business owner, a founder of your own business, you don't have the bandwidth, right, to do everything. One of the things I see a lot with business owners is they spend a lot of time kind of worrying about finance and administration, and it's not really their skill set, as you kind of alluded to. And so it takes them more time, and it's, that kind of bandwidth that they're using on something that's really not value added for their business is an opportunity lost, I think, for them to focus on their skills and their passions, which is growing their business, with the skills that have, taken them this far, if that makes sense. So I think one of the things I'm trying to do is say, hey, guys, let us as fractional finance directors take that pain away from you. We'll manage your finances, obviously in collaboration with you,
Mm.
because it is really important that a business owner understands what's going on in the business, and everything goes through finance ultimately that happens in a business. So therefore, finance should be helping the business, and business leadership to make decisions and to understand what's going on rather than actually being a burden for business owners, whereby business owners are just like, oh gosh, I need to worry about this. I need to focus on doing these tasks. I don't like doing it. I don't really understand it. I'm not very good at it. So yeah, that's kind of where we try and step in to help.
And I am so passionate now about telling people about it's important to have someone who's a financial mind. They don't have to be employed by you, um, but they are your partner in that. Because I realize with me, I can see money in the present, i.e., what's in the bank account, what do I need to save? I can't see money in the future, i.e., am I going to earn enough money to invest in that thing to help my business grow, whatever that thing may be? And that's what I really struggle with. And I actually get anxious and annoyed thinking about that. So I need someone else to give me permission to do things. So is that familiar for you, Ramesh, when I say those things?
Yeah, you describe it really well, and actually the emotive impact it has on you, right? It's really stressful, isn't it? And look, my group of finance directors, we've all got that kind of large corporation experience, but we've been working with small and medium-sized enterprise, so we really get that stress. We've all been businesses where cash might run out in 3 months' time. And, I'm a firm believer that you can deal with most things if you know what's coming. You can plan and prepare and understand what levers you can push and pull to kind of get through a tricky period. And where we can help potentially is help manage those cash flows. So project what's going to happen. And I think there's a lot of misconception about cash and when it's going to come in and also the link between cash flows and profits because they're not necessarily the same thing. And I think that can catch a lot of businesses out. I'm doing a presentation actually quite soon on the differences between those two aspects, Fee, and actually, not managing cash flows well is the main reason businesses fail. So it's a hugely important thing to understand, get to grips with, and get comfortable with ultimately.
Yeah, I think actually I wrote an article recently based upon a report that the two main reasons small businesses fail, there are two. One is cash flow
Mm.
and the other is lack of marketing. So
Oh,
the
okay, interesting.
spaces that you
Mhm.
and I exist in. I
Yes.
The other thing I've seen in small businesses is there's often I think a balance between sorting out the financial side and the numbers and passion and what you want to do. So what I mean by that is that some business owners will say, I know I'm not making any money on this thing, but I really enjoy doing it, so I want to keep doing it, but it's not making any money. Um, and having a discussion about how to make those type of things work better, well, it can be the difference between a business succeeding and not succeeding and coming to a compromise on that. Yes, you enjoy that thing, but actually, I mean, my daughter, we were talking about it on an earlier podcast. She did this little side hustle where she made shoes, bejeweled shoes for people. So buying a pair of Converse, plain white, someone will pay you 80 quid and you put loads of beads or jewels on them so that you bejewel them up. But the cost she was selling them for wasn't covering the 6 hours it took her. I mean, that's a
Right.
really crude example. But you must have come across, Romesh, companies where the turnover's there, there might be a small amount of profit, but there's barely any margin because they're spending 6 hours on creating that thing and the cost, the margins just aren't there for selling that thing. How do
Yeah.
you have conversations like that when someone's so all in and so emotionally committed?
It's really hard, isn't it? Because I think you're right. You touched on something quite important there. And people start businesses for lots and lots of reasons, for independence, for creativity. There are so, for passion for a particular thing, whatever that might be. But ultimately, whatever your reason is for setting up a business, if you want it to work in the long term, it's got to be viable. And for it to be viable, it has to be profitable ultimately, and it has to have positive cash flows. It's another element of sustainability in a way. I'm a real believer in sustainability per se. Everyone interprets that as obviously the environment, and that's massively important. But actually, I believe in sustainability for businesses as well, and that's the survival of businesses. Um, if that makes sense. And I think one of the things we do is we can project what cash flows might look like. And the thing is, the numbers don't often lie. So it's like an analogy I like to use is, I try and avoid going onto a weighing machine in the mornings, and but every now and again I'll venture onto the scales, if you like, in the bathroom, and like oh gosh, and it's often a surprise which isn't the right one. I think I'm
I
in
feel
good
that pain.
shape. Yeah, but do you know what I mean? I think it's very easy to build a story in your head. And you're in your own world, especially if you've got your own business and you're doing all these different things, you're busy. Um, and you kind of think, okay, well, things are moving, they're okay, they're fine. But just like when I step on those bathroom scales, thinking, oh yeah, I'm in pretty good shape, and look at them and go, oh gosh, I'm actually weigh a few kilograms more than I expected, and those numbers don't lie. I can't hide from that. I can't hide from that, so I have to deal with it.
Mm.
Um, and so, I think it's preparedness, really. It's first being brave enough to say, okay, well, let's have a look at the data. We try and make that data non-complex, transparent, and easy. So as I mentioned earlier, I've worked for massive corporations, billions of pounds of turnover, that kind of thing. Um, and there's complexity in what we do, but actually, I think the trick is, in terms of your point on communicating and kind of messaging to our clients and business owners, is actually keep it simple, keep it transparent, keep it accessible. And that's part of what I think is our particular superpower, which is, we can do all of the complex stuff in the background, but it's not for us to kind of dazzle people with acronyms and accounting terms and all that kind of stuff. There's no value in that. A business owner just wants to know, well, what's going well, what's not going well, and what do I need to do?
Yeah,
Right? If you boil it down into those simple things. And do I trust the person who's giving me this advice? Have we spent time together? Do they understand the business, not just from a numbers perspective, but also from a commercial perspective as well? And that's what I think is really important too. You've got to see the whole picture. But ultimately, I think if you do, our approach is to understand, look for data and information, and then use that to paint a picture, and then discuss that with our clients, and help them plot the best way to navigate an opportunity or a weakness that needs to be resolved.
I I always talk as well in marketing and PR, but I think it's relevant to money as well. Is what's your goal? Because for me, I don't want to scale up business. I don't want lots of little Fiona Scotts popping up all over the country. I mean, if my daughter Lauren takes it on, she may have a different view in the future, but I don't want that. But I do want to make a profit because if I make a profit, I can do other things and I can try other things. So for me, the goal is um, to be more of what I am already. And without profit in the business, I can't write the next book, introduce the new service, run the next PR summit because I haven't got the money, the liquidity to do it. Um, Whereas a scale up business, that route to that goal is it might be harder. It might be, I don't want to say cutthroat. It might be that the numbers and the way I get there has less emotion involved in it. I mean, what do you think, Romesh, when I lay out those two sort of different types of goals?
I think you've hit, an important point, which is what do you want? And you've got clarity in terms of what you want, for you personally. You don't necessarily want to grow a massive business. You want to be profitable so that you can thrive and do what you're doing as well as you can, but not necessarily having scale to that. and that's fine. And I think that that's a really fantastic, I think there's a lot of kind of pressure in the world to kind of grow something massive if you're in business, to raise multiple investment rounds, Series A, B, C, whatever. And that's fine, if you want to do that, and if that's right for you and it's right for the business, perfect. But it has to be, you've got to start with what does the business owner want? And then analyze and break down and try and help them achieve those goals. But you've got to start with very basics because they are very different things, right?
Mm, definitely. I mean, I'm sure within your business, you have your own goals, you have your own personal goals. And I was really clear very early on what I wanted and exceeded my goals after 5 or 6 years. And the rest has just been jo growth around joy, doing something I love.
Yeah.
But the numbers still matter. And the other thing I noticed really early on when I started Ramesh, I was with a business partner and I let them deal with the numbers because the numbers didn't interest me. And that was a huge mistake. Because when we came to a parting of the ways, which was as amicable as it could be, I realised I didn't know the numbers. I didn't know what was being put in through the books. And I had an accountant that turned up, here's your bag of receipts, pay them one amount a year, and they would do the legal stuff. And I think that was the one moment when I realised I needed something more holistic in that, and that would cost me more, but it was so worth the investment of having someone around me that I could call at a moment's notice to discuss numbers. I mean, I think when you have an FD, a fractional FD, if you even recognise you need that person, you're in Ramesh's world rather than Fiona's world. I don't know. Would a company like mine need an FD? It feels like a really grand term for something that a six-figure turnover business wouldn't need. Talk me through that. Am I thinking wrongly about this?
No, you're not. You've asked a really, really good question, actually. And look, finance director sounds really, but look, most business owners are directors of their business, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's just a senior finance person. And to be clear, what we do is we kind of build on the work that an accountant would do. So typically in a smaller growing business, you might have an outsourced accountant who just does the annual accounts, who does the tax, who might, have a couple of meetings with the business owner a year or every quarter just to discuss things. But we're finance people who've worked in operational businesses of all sizes, and actually, we have because we're a group of fractional consultants. We've got numerous clients of varying sizes across a variety of sectors, which means we're constantly adding to our experience, if that makes sense. So yeah, sometimes that support can just be conversational. It can be very light touch. Hey, Ramesh, or, Mr. Consultant, whoever, this is what I'm doing. How would you approach this? I'm planning to invest X amount in something, in a project, in something which I believe is going to take my business to the next level, for example. How do I manage that? How do I avoid common pitfalls? How can I make sure that I'm not risking the other parts of the business, that I'm not going to kind of risk running out of cash? And what we can do, for example, then is build on the work that the accountants do, which is posting the invoices and paying the debtors and kind of, doing all the kind of cash reconciliations. That's what the kind of your standard accountants do. What a finance director does is take that information and firstly make sure it's correct, because if someone's not in the business all the time and if they don't understand the business, if you're just a kind of Commonwealth Garden kind of accountant who's just posting invoices, with the best will in the world, you may not be producing accounts which are actually helpful to the business. So we like And you mentioned a figure business fee, and actually that could be right for kind of maybe monthly or quarterly management accounts, whereby you're looking at numbers which are relevant for your business, but they're not being produced for the tax man or for company's house. They're being produced for you. Yeah, so they're in a style and a format that is helpful for you to see how the business is going. Does
Mm.
that make sense? So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah, and obviously for smaller businesses, there's less complexity, so there might be, it might be fairly straightforward to kind of do that. Um, but as businesses grow, they tend to become more and more complex as you introduce more services, more income streams, different costs appear, etc., different projects. So how do you know that project A, for example, or service A that you provide to your clients is profitable versus service B? If you're just looking at it once a year in some annual accounts, which aren't even produced for you, they're being produced because the government's told you you need to do it.
Mm.
So we think that that kind of it's not a value added product at that point in time, right? It's not a value added piece of it, but we think that data can be used really, really helpfully for businesses. And again, it's us trying to make it transparent, accessible, and easy to understand for people who aren't accountants. And yes, we're accountants, we understand it, but we'd still say, oh, if it's a technical thing, you should probably get it checked out with an accountant. We can talk to them for you, but we're all about commercial understanding of the business. What are your problems? What are your challenges? What are the numbers telling us? How do we control your processes? How do we help you mitigate risk? If you're planning a strategy over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, how do you how do you quantify that strategy? So a common thing we sometimes see is a client will say, "Okay, this is what we want to do for the next year," and we plot it into a forecast. We model it into a spreadsheet. And basically, we'll say, well, you want to grow sales by X. So you want to employ more salespeople, for example. If you employ salespeople at the rate that you're talking about at the moment that you've got in your head, with the amount of growth in sales you're expecting to get, actually you're going to run out of money before you get the opportunity for that kind of kick from the sales to really come in. And our numbers are showing that. So maybe you need to stagger the kind of appointment of salespeople, or maybe we need to challenge the assumptions, can you grow quicker?
I
For
get it
example,
now.
right?
So that's a much more holistic approach then, um, to business growth, where you're there along the way rather than getting stuck in the mud later because all your assumptions were wrong or your predictions are wrong. There isn't that voice of reason that says, have you thought about this? Because actually, business owners can make assumptions just based on that,
Yeah.
yeah, how they feel, what they want to do. There might be no basis in reality. And
Yeah,
so,
that
with that in mind, I am going to take you left field now because,
okay.
okay, I'm going to take you left field now because how does Romesh and FD Consultants then become visible? What's your PR strategy, Romesh?
Oh, you've got me there. Well, look, I'm, yeah, I mentioned the business is 5 years old. I'm pleased to say that we've been growing steadily since I started, and literally it was just me at the beginning when I started, and I didn't imagine that I would have a collective of 5 consultants, at this stage. So I'm really, really pleased with the way it's going. But to kind of get there, I've had to be on a continuous learning path. And, I'm not a salesperson. I've had to understand and learn how to have conversations with people when you're essentially selling a service, right? And that's been a journey for me, because that's not really what I'm comfortable doing. But I've learned to kind of, I suppose, lean into my strengths, which is just being honest, talking about our values and what we're trying to achieve with our clients, how we like to work with our clients. And if that resonates, then we take things forwards. And I'm really comfortable now with that. You've got to learn to put yourself out there. When I first started, Fee, someone, a good friend of mine, suggested that I set up a website. At which point I told them in no uncertain terms that that was not going to happen. Bleep, bleep was my response. There was no way I wanted a picture of myself spat over the internet. I had a Facebook and Instagram account. I didn't use them that much really, and I just wasn't comfortable with it. But actually, I've got a website now. I do podcasts. I'm doing this, and you just have to learn and develop. And sorry, that's a really roundabout way of saying that PR has been a learning curve for
Yeah.
me.
I can
Yeah,
see that you do have a PR strategy, you just not might have said it in those terms. Um, you know, you are a PR being public relations, not press relations.
mm,
I happen to specialize in press relations, but you do have a website, you do have a podcast, you do go networking, you do take opportunities to do things, you have a presence on LinkedIn. Those are at least five strands that have got you, well, five strands for 5 years. We could call it that, couldn't we? For growth,
yeah, yeah. I like
progressing.
that.
But also, in a world of finance, um, your personality shines through, which you won't see because you're used to yourself, but I see. I do remember giving a talk at a finance conference some years ago now, probably 6 or 7 years ago, where I asked to give a talk, and I deliberately went in jeans and a t-shirt because I could pretty much guess what that room looked like. And when I was one of only about three women, that was the first thing, and it was a sea of suits. It was a sea of
Yeah.
suits in that finance room. And I remember thinking, I'm going to disrupt this room, and there will be a lot of people who don't like what I've got to say. But the reality is, um, there will be personalities in this room who will understand that I am saying this is the future of visibility. You have to be a personality. You don't have to be all singing or dancing famous
Mhm.
whistles and wear hats and be gimmicky, but you do have to show up as an authentic person. And I actually think you're masterful at doing that, and you don't realize that you are.
You're always so kind with your words,
No,
Fiona.
no,
Honestly,
it's
I'm
just
really grateful for
it's
that.
just
Yeah, I mean,
truthful. It's just truthful. And I think you've only just started to be confident in that area. You're only at the beginning of that thing. You really are. I mean, I should say it sound like I'm trying to pitch to you, but I am absolutely not. I'm a really busy person, and I know that you will, if you want to work with me on media outreach, you will do so when you are ready. But personalities in the world of finance, particularly finance in the larger small businesses, if that makes sense, are few and far between, Ramesh. There aren't many of them. I mean, how many can you name?
yeah, I mean, firstly, again, thank you so much. That's wonderful. But look, you bring out the best of me by, being such a lovely person yourself, and you're just so direct and straight, but in a really nice way, because that can be, it can push people away, that kind of approach, if you don't do it well. But you do, and I've always appreciated that. You also, I think, you know what you're talking about. And that always comes across with you. And so, I've always liked and respected, my conversations with you because of that connection. But I'm really glad to hear you say that because I think that a finance director, again, using that grand term, FD, whatever, has a unique opportunity because you are often the right hand of the managing director or the founder or the CEO or the leadership team, however you want to couch it, you are often the right hand of the leadership. And actually, it gives you a really unique chance to help because being a business leader is a really lonely place,
Mm. And I
right?
just think that a fractional director has an added benefit. And I've seen this in so many small businesses. because you are not employed within the business, there is no agenda, and therefore you become someone that a leader can talk to, and you might be the only person that they can talk to without there being a hidden agenda, who will give them honest feedback, not telling them exactly what they want to hear because there's a hidden agenda, because they're employed. And I think that puts you in a space that is quite unique, actually, especially if you've got a team of board of directors, because I tend to work with smaller businesses, but if you've got a board of directors, and I've seen this many times where they fall out or they argue, and the person at the head of it has no one to talk to, is quite lonely. Or there might be a partnership where there's a number of partners and the managing partner has no one to talk to at a senior enough level where it's safe, it's private to talk to them. I bet you, Romesh, and we've nearly finished our time, but I bet you actually, in some ways, you become quite a counsellor, and your four other colleagues as well will become counsellors to these people who might be really successful, but can be incredibly lonely.
I think there's certainly an aspect to that. We can certainly we certainly once we've built that trust and the relationship kind of builds over time, we can certainly do that. And I think ultimately it's understanding and having a bit of emotional intelligence, kind of empathy to build that trust because actually even if you took the counseling mentoring element out of it, which I think you described how powerful it can be, and I'm a real believer in that, but even if you just boil it down to the functions of what we do, um a good FD can only do their job well really if there's trust, if there's credibility in the relationship. And because we are outside of the organization, there are the advantages you talked about, but it's a bit more challenging as well because you have less time, etc. So I think when I brought my consultants on board, I'm really, really careful and picky because I want people above all to be individuals who can build relationships and
Mm.
build that trust. And our technical expertise and what we're striving for and what we can achieve, we're confident we can do that. I say that humbly, of course, but it's about the relationship as well as our expertise and experience.
Look, Romesh, we've come to the end of our time. That flew by. Um, Please let people know if they're listening or watching, how can they find you?
Okay. Listen, I've got a very long surname. I'm Romesh Jeyaseelanayagam. Don't worry. An easier way to find me if you can't find me on LinkedIn is our website, which is thefdconsultant.com. So that's a good way to find me. I also do a podcast, which is, it's actually monthly at the moment, but it's probably going to be every couple of weeks. That's on YouTube and Spotify, and that's called Strive and Thrive. And we cover not just finance, myself and my co-host Mike. We cover all kinds of areas. And actually, Fee, I'm going to ask you live on air now if at some point you'd like to come and join us on that because I think you could add a lot of value to our audience there.
I would absolutely love to. We'll take that discussion offline, but yeah,
Absolutely.
no problem at all. Thank you so much,
Fantastic.
Romesh. Thank you. And to
Thank you,
everyone
Fiona.
listening, no, you're welcome. That's it for today. I really hope you've enjoyed my chat with Romesh. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to find me, I'm at scottmedia.uk. I'm on Facebook, Fiona Scott's PR Tribe. Just mention this programme and I will let you in. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Until next time, thank you.